All right, good morning, everyone. Let's get started. We're having some technical difficulties. My apologies. We're trying to get the speakers online. Something went wrong with the invitations, but I know they're actually there. We're just trying to get them onto the same session as well. So welcome to the IATA Digital Cargo webinars. This is a replacement normal. We have the Digital Cargo Conference this week in Geneva, but of course, you know, this is a special year, so we had to replace the webinars. And in fact, we have a whole series of webinars. So today, it's the executive session with some great speakers. Jessica Tyler is going to be joining in a minute, and we also have Ashok from IBS, Ashok Rajan from IBS, who's also dialed in, and then we have Jonathan Parkinson from Air Canada, who will be the session chair today. We have some more episodes coming up. You can see that on the screen. We have 6 in total. The next one is on Thursday, and you can see for yourself. If you go to our website, in fact, if you Google IATA Digital Cargo webinars, you will actually get to the whole planning with all the links. Well, you know where it is because you managed to get in today as well. So firstly, I would like to thank the sponsors we have for this. We have IBS Software, who's our main sponsor, and we also thank PayCargo and Riga Software for supporting this event. Just a technicality, as you probably know, we have competition law guidelines. We're not allowed to discuss many things, including pricing, fares, etc., commissions. We're not allowed to speak about allocations of markets, marketing plans, etc., group boycotts, you name it. You can see it on the screen. Most of you are aware of these guidelines. Typically, what happens if we do talk about these things, because it's a webinar, we'll just have to close the webinar. So please don't talk about it. In this case, it's actually only the speakers that can talk anyway, and they're pretty well trained in this. But also, please don't ask questions about this because it's just not how it should work. In terms of participation, you'll only be able to hear the presenters. Your microphones will all be disabled automatically, but we do encourage you very strongly to interact via the questions. There's a question box. In fact, if you look at the Teams application on your screen, there's a little question mark. There's an icon with a question mark. If you click on that, you'll be able to submit questions. And I encourage you to ask questions as we're speaking, as the presenters are speaking. And just if you have a question, just react immediately. And then in the case of the first speaker, Jessica, we will then, after her session, do the Q&A directly. And then at the end of the actual webinar, we'll have some more Q&A time for anything that is for Ashok or myself. Right, so just so that you know,
Hank?
we're actually, yes, sorry.
Hi, it's Jessica. Sorry about that.
Hi, Jessica. I'm not sure if people can hear you or if it's just me. Yeah? Okay, perfect. Let's go. So we're recording this session for future use. So hopefully you're okay with that. If not, it's probably best to leave now. And with that, I would like to introduce the session chair. This is Jonathan Parkinson from Air Canada, and he'll be leading the session today. So Jonathan, I know you're online, so over to you. I can see Jonathan talk, but I can't hear Jonathan.
How about now? All good?
Yes, Jonathan. Yeah, that's good.
Let's start again. So, hi everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. I'm thrilled to be chairing this executive session to kick off the Digital Cargo Conference. I have to say, despite the pandemic, and I'm sure you all feel the same way, and all the various travel restrictions, somehow we've all embraced technology globally. And in many ways, at least for me, feel much more connected than ever before. Like many of you, I've been working from home for 6 months now, and my world has become all about Zoom team meetings, but I miss traveling so much and would have loved for all of us to be in the same room together. I miss it so much. In fact, all these Teams calls that I'm on, I'm sure you feel the same way. When people join meetings from their car and you hear the background noise, I miss traveling so much. I'm not hearing the background noise. To me, it's starting to sound like the ocean. I'm still getting used to video calls, and I've had the privilege of speaking at both the digital conference and the World Cargo Symposium. And if you've seen me speak before, I usually go up and down the stage. I talk with my hands. So for me, this very much feels like a timeout, you know, sitting punishment on a chair. So if you see my eyes wandering, I'm apologizing in advance. Just quickly say, this past weekend, I had the privilege of being a judge again for the third time at the third IATA Cargo Hackathon. And every year it just keeps getting better. And I know there's a session coming up later in the series, so I don't want to, you know, steal any thunder. But, you know, I just want to say that, you know, it's so inspiring and motivating when you see people from all over the world, all ages, come together to solve industry challenges using IATA's One Record. So, you know, it's inspiring, it's motivating, and it shows us that we're not just talking about things, we're doing it. So I want to thank IATA for that and for finding a way to keep that going, as well as this. Despite everything happening in the world, it really helps keep the momentum going, so let's keep it up. So all that said, with that, let's get started. Today, we're joined by three industry leaders. We have Jessica Tyler, who's President of Cargo and VP Airports Excellence at American Airlines. We have Ashok Rajan, Senior VP and Global Business Head at IBS. And we have Hank. So like Hank mentioned, each speaker will present. For the first one after Jessica, we'll go immediately into the Q&A. And after that, we'll proceed with the other presentations. So with that, very excited to hear all of the speakers. I'll turn it over to Jessica. Welcome, Jessica.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, great, good. All right, very excited to be here. Like, I see Jonathan still speaking. Is he still speaking? Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. Hank, I'm trying to make sure that you can see and hear me. Sorry about that. I see, is someone going to share the presentation?
I'm just sending a chat. I think they're just loading it up now. I just sent them a chat. I can hear you. I'm not sure if they can, but I can see your presentation.
Okay, I cannot. All right, we can. All right. There we go. All right. So thank you so much, Jonathan. You know, hearing you say you really wish you could be out traveling, you miss traveling. Obviously, as a leader in the industry and a member of American Airlines, I sure wish we could all fly. Obviously, this has been a tremendous crisis for passenger airlines. So I really just thank you for the opportunity, to Hank and IATA, for letting me be with you today. Like Jonathan said, it's just amazing the work that we're able to keep going in this time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we're all trying to solve the same problems, and that is a really inefficient way for us to move forward in this industry. As you all know, our industry is decades behind, and we need the momentum and leadership to keep moving. So I love hearing about the efforts that continue to move forward with One Record. And so we need that kind of coalition of members of this industry to come together to problem solve together, right? To be more efficient in our ability to modernize. So you'll hear from Hank and Ashok here in a little bit. I'm going to focus a little bit more on how the technology and the standards and things that you'll hear from Hank and Ashok are absolutely critical, but they're only as good as the people and leaders working differently, leading differently in this industry. So if you'll go to the next slide, I'll start with just a little background. So this particular image that you're seeing on the next slide hung on my refrigerator as a child. And I was the product of self-employed small business owners. My parents had a business for more than 40 years. And really, while at the time, this, I don't know if someone can move the slide forward for me, or if I can. There, thank you. So this was on our refrigerator. It was very passive, just hung on the refrigerator for years. And not knowing it at the time, but now it has become a very much a part of the way that I think, and I think our industry needs to think, that now more than ever, we have to figure out ways to adapt and evolve, or we risk not being able to play a part in the supply chain that is so critical to the world. So when I think about the disruption and the new players that are entering our market, it's because this industry is so ripe for change, and we're all working towards that. And really, good enough isn't good enough. You always have to stay moving, always have to stay changing. And 2020, like Jonathan said, that it'll go down in history as one of the most challenging years for us as humanity, right? It's been incredible to watch the economic impact, as well as the stress and dire situation that this virus has caused. And it's amazing to look around and see how businesses have reinvented themselves. Think about how you get groceries, or how you continue to buy the things that you want to buy in terms of retail. Think about the restaurants that you may be getting either delivery or to-go orders from, and how much they've had to change their model every year. So when I think about, comparing to 2019, if you remember back in 2019, we all thought that was a tough year. And I think 2020 has, trumped, no pun intended for our presidential, our president, but 2020 has trumped any year in the past, a very long time for our industry and for our world. And I shared yesterday internally our August results, and we were only down 3% in terms of revenue compared to 2019's August results, but we were down, as you can imagine, as a passenger airline, more than 60% in capacity. And our CEO, Doug Parker, asked me, well, how are you doing that? And I said, we're stuffing the heck out of every aircraft we can. We've done thousands of cargo-only flights for the first time in more than 3 decades. And, I think a couple of days ago, we broke a record on a 777 with more than 125,000 pounds. So we're literally doing as much as we can to play our part, just as many of you are, in this crisis. It's never been clearer the purpose of our industry. So when I think about all the different players that make up the supply chain of moving goods and people around the world, it has been such a proud moment for all of us to be part of this right now, where the rest of the world gets to see how critical we are to life, right? To delivering goods and getting people where they need to be in a time like this. And so I just think about that purpose, and that is what has united most of us internally here at American, but also across with all of our partners and customers and handlers in making sure that we play the part well. So I think many of you know, I'm on this next slide. So many of you know that we just implemented iCargo, the IBS solution. We took about 3.5 years to do that. You can see on the left there our old world, which was 40-year-old technology. Our main core system was one of 90 different systems that ran our business from invoicing to, from booking all the way to invoicing, and all of the operational logistics technologies in between. And now on the right, you see what our modern world looks like, right, with the iCargo solution. What I want to talk about is the fact that when we had this 90 some odd system ecosystem, it really choked our ability to adapt quickly to change and to customer needs. When I think about when I first started, I'm actually kind of a youngster in this industry. I've been here about 8.5 years. And I remember an effort early on to try to make one character change in a field so that we could better track a certain product. And that one change, which sounds really simple, was going to cost us $1 million, and we had to say no. And that's the kind of thing that happens when you have these sort of out of control ecosystems, decades old technology. Making one minor change has to persist through all of that, and it becomes something that you're unable to do. So now that we've implemented, 3.5 years later, we're really proud to say that we finally did the final deployment was in August with our mail modules. So we have a new mail operations module as well as mail accounting. And that was the final major deployment for our 3-year journey. And I say it's the starting line. A lot of people who worked on it and gave their lives to it thought it was the finish line, but really it's just it's really just the beginning. So this platform allows us to do the things that you're going to hear Hank and Ashok talk about, which is connect to the modern world, connect to our customers, connect to our handlers in a way that's seamless. And so when I think about this, while it was a major technology project, right, the amount of testing and cutover support and all of the things that we did to make sure that we had plan A, B, C, and D, we really did all of the things technology-wise to make a smooth transition. And I can't thank IBS and their team enough for being our partner in that journey. But what I'm most proud of is the ability to change the way that we work and think about our business. So when I think about a normal learning journey, did we just lose the event? Hello?
We're still present. We're putting on the slide now.
Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jessica. Sorry about that. We have some technical challenges here.
Okay. And you can move to the next slide too when you pull it up.
There's a delay between us changing and you speaking, so the next slide is showing already. It's already showing, okay. So it's a problem when you mix the sound and then video. But anyway, you're good. Go ahead.
Okay, great. So what I was transitioning to is really that while this was a major technology effort and so many things could have gone wrong, and many things did go a little bit sideways. That the learning curve for our team really looks like this, right? It's not linear. It is one day we think we're doing great, the next day something happens. And what I would argue is that through that journey, what is most exciting is the ability to have created owners of this new system and owners of our process and owners of the way in which we work. And so when I talk about that, that is the part of the effort that was most important, was to change mindsets, to change behavior across our team. We have an industry award-winning team, and they were doing that prior to our transition with one hand tied behind their back, right? With 40-year-old technology, very little of any type of modern tools. And so to take that type of team and that type of customer-focused orientation and apply it with new tools. While it sounds everybody was ready for the change, everybody knew we needed new technology, but really we needed to change the way in which we worked. We did not want to retrofit the technology to our old ways. We wanted to make sure that we leveraged the technology to its fullest. And so that journey is really lumpy, right? And I would argue, if you go to the next slide, that in today's environment in 2020, we're actually doing this cycle daily, right? So when you look at the next slide, and you can flip through it quickly. So the next slide and the next slide, I would just say that we're doing this learning over and over and over again. And when I think about, you never really arrive, right? When I think about the work that we did, we literally, you know, in terms of, you can even go to the next one. So I think of it as daily, and even the next slide shows hourly. When I think about the other part of my job, which is airports, I think about the fact that when this crisis began, we literally had to interpret, make decisions, and implement in hours, not days, not months, not years. It was hours. And so this learning cycle, it gets compressed into these hourly chunks. And when I think about the way we work, that rapid learning, that problem solving, if you'll go back a slide, really we have great problem solvers, but we tend to solve problems that we know and have had before. And what we're doing right now in 2020 is solving problems that don't have a playbook, right? None of us could have imagined the kinds of things that we're having to do both in cargo and for us in the passenger world. And so when I think about all of the cleaning efforts and the mask requirements, so those are things that my team is reacting and responding to and responsible for in this crisis, as well as things like the cargo-only flying. I mentioned we hadn't done it in over 30 years. We're a passenger airline. Our systems, our thinking, our decision-making matrix is based on running a passenger airline. And so to be able to very quickly change minds, even internally, to do these cargo-only flights was no easy feat, but we did it in a matter of days. And so to me, the talent that the industry needs right now is not so much in expertise and certain knowledge. It is the talent is about the ability to learn, your capacity to learn, adapt, apply, and rinse and repeat. And so when I think about the industry, I think about mindsets, the way we think and look at our work, as well as the talent that we're looking to attract into this industry. You're looking for learners. You're looking for people who are learners and problem solvers in ways that maybe we've never experienced before. And so when I think about that, I think about, if you go to the next slide, and this was really my last slide, this is what change and learning looks like. It's a people business, right? It is absolutely making sure that you've created an environment that allows people to work together collaboratively. And really, when you marry great technology with a team that can stay focused and collaborate, you can create incredible relationships with customers, handlers, and all of the players that make up the industry. And I would say that as an industry, we need to apply that same thing. So these pictures are of our own team solving our own problems, going on our own modernization journey. But I would say that this needs to be scaled to the industry, right? So when I hear Jonathan talk about things like hackathons and places where we're coming together to think through and solve interesting problems together, I would just say we need more of that. And when I think about this industry and what it needs people like us, the folks on this call and this webinar, to make decisions and to lead through that change. Without that, the technology and the things that you're going to hear Hank and Ashok talk about don't get us anywhere. And honestly, if I look back at something like the airway bell, I think that's why it took so long, right? As much as we've made so much progress in that space, many of you have been part of that journey the entire time, but it took more than 20 years to really get a critical mass. And what I would say is we still haven't changed the way in which we work We're just now getting into that, where we really are saying we don't need the paper to come. If you've done an e-airway bill, we don't need your paper. I feel like putting recycle bins at our counters across the terminals. So we have to make sure that along with the technologies and the problems that we're solving, that we're also changing the way we work and the things that we expect from each other. So the other critical piece is that, you know, the supply chain, the different players in this industry have to hold each other accountable and work together differently if change is going to occur. And it really starts with all of us. And so what I'd like to just kind of wrap up with is, you know, I think it is absolutely incredible to see IATA making progress with One Record, with all of us a part of that journey. And we need more of it, we need it faster, and we need to make sure that we're continuously evolving. So with that, Hank, I'll stop there and see if you want to go to questions.
That was absolutely fantastic, Jessica. Thanks for that. There are questions coming in. We can go right into Q&A, and I'll start with the first one, if you're okay with that.
Sure.
So the first one came in, and I'm just going to read it. It says, the modernization journey is successful only when all industry embraces the same journey. How did you convince your customers and business partners to embark on the same journey?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. I'm very thankful for the relationships we have with customers. Many of our customers are on the same journey, right? So when I think about, Jonathan, I'm looking at you and I see you're still talking and I can't tell if...
There's a lag between the video, so
okay.
We'll just keep going. Yeah.
Sorry. Okay. So when I think about that, it really comes down to communication. I know it sounds a little cliche, but I cannot tell you how much communication and partnership and involvement matters to things like this. So very early on, we engaged in customer focus groups. We engaged our most modern customers as well as our least modern customers in describing where we were headed and that we wanted them along with us. And was it easy and beautiful? Not in any way, shape, or form. It was hard. It was constant communication. You can imagine on a 3-year journey, it's not like, hey, we're doing this and it's happening next week. It's months and months of communication and preparation and making sure they understood what we expected. Many of them were ready for the change. They were wanting the change that we were, sharing with them. But some, we had to create ways for them to engage with us. So we have, on our .com channel, we have a way for small, medium, players to engage with the airway bill if they don't have the technology to do it themselves. We have a portal for them to do that. And so we really wanted to make sure that all of our customers can engage with us in this new modern way. So to me, it comes down to communication and involvement. Communication isn't just sending emails. It's sitting down and sharing the journey, listening. We listened a lot to what customers were wanting and expecting from us. And it's not one size fits all. Obviously our big top customers have varied systems and varied expectations, all the way to our kind of smaller specialized customers that have very specific needs. So it's a lot of listening and a lot of involvement.
Great. That was a great answer. Thanks for that. We'll go to question number 2. What are the jobs and profiles of the future in cargo that would enable the new digital era?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I talked a little bit about talent. One of my big hot buttons is talent. And I think this industry is in dire need of diversity. And diversity comes in all shapes, sizes, and when I talk about it in a very broad way, meaning we need people that think differently, that have different experiences, that come from different industries, and we need to mix it up, right? We have very special programs within American to make sure we're attracting talent, not only kind of supply chain talent, but and technological talent in terms of, development and partners like IBS, but also just great strategic thinkers and problem solvers. And I talked a little bit about, to me, the currency of talent going forward is that ability to learn and adapt. So when I interview people, I don't talk about, tell me about, your last, 6 jobs you've had or the experience you have had in the industry or in some other industry. I want to know how you learn. I want to know how you adapt. I want to know how you problem solve. I want to give you a problem and hear how you think through it, because that's, to me, the talent we need more of in this industry is creativity. It's the capacity to learn.
That's great. Just to add quickly, we often hear, when we talk about talent in the future, kids today, they know how to use iPads at 1 or 2 years old, and that's just part of the norm, and they grow up that way. And these kids are going to grow into, they'll be employees in no time and leaders in a short time after that. So everything around technology is just absolutely paramount. Really like that answer around the creative problem solving. We'll go to the next question. How do you see the number of cargo-only aircraft evolve in the next months? Should carriers focus on modifying most of the commercial flights?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's hard to have one answer, right? So, like I mentioned, obviously we're a passenger airline, and we have different constraints and different ways of thinking about our business. Cargo is a critical part, like I mentioned before. The purpose of American Airlines Cargo has never been clear internally and externally about the role we play. It's become the bright spot in this really tough time where we've had major layoffs and are struggling financially and really doing all the things that we need to do to make this airline last another 100 years. Cargo has been the bright spot, and people understand that our purpose as an airline is not just about passengers. It's about people and goods, right? Moving around the world, and we are playing that role. And so when I think about that, that's very different than an organization that is all cargo, right? So, when I think about a passenger carrier, when I think about different parts of the world, we have different regulations in the U.S. than we do see in Europe and Asia. And so modifying aircraft, I think, is a very specific to your own business model, right? We've chosen not to for all kinds of reasons. We actually got clearance to modify the upper deck from our governing bodies here in the U.S. But when we did the economics, it just didn't make sense. We had plenty of capacity across the aircraft that we had parked because of the passenger schedule reductions. And we pulled those aircraft out of the parking lot and got them flying again. And like I mentioned, just lack of a better word, stuffed them full of important things. And so for us right now, the economics makes sense to keep doing these cargo-only flights. I've had the freighter question, or someone called it a freighter, passenger freighter. And so when I think about capacity, I think about capacity in a lot of different ways, right? You can get additional capacity by modifying aircraft. You can, partner with another airline. That's where joint businesses and other relationships come in handy. You can do it all kinds of ways. And so I do think, as demand continues and we prep for things like vaccine distribution, we're going to see all kinds of decision making. So I'm reluctant to say exactly like what I think we're doing or what anybody else should be doing, because I do think it matters to your own business model and matching up what you can do for your customers. So, and I think those decision-making cycles, like I talked about, are so quick. So what I tell you today may change in a week, right? You may hear me say, oh, we're not going to modify the top. It doesn't make economic sense right now. But a week from now, my team might come back to me and say, yep, we're stripping it out and loading up top, right? So the ability to think through those decisions quickly and adapt quickly and then implement to meet customer needs is the most important thing, I think.
Well, thanks very much, Jessica. That was fantastic. Thank you very much for joining us today. I know it's very early for me, and it's even earlier for you in Texas. So thanks for that.
Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And with that, we will invite Mr. Ashok Rajan, VP, Senior VP Global Business Head from IBS. We'll load up his presentation, and Ashok, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jonathan. I'm hoping that my slides are visible as well. Yeah, all right.
Yep.
Thank you. And I think, as Jonathan and Jessica were saying, thank you again to IATA for keeping on this digital cargo conference going. I've been in these conferences since the first one in 2004. I think this is the first time we've truly gone digital in the sense, in the real sense of the word. And the fact that we're keeping this going is a testament to how important this is to this industry as such. And I think as Jonathan was saying, it's very inspiring listening to Jessica. And I think people from the digital side of things like us feel very proud when somebody who headed a very successful digital transformation program is called upon to run the business itself. I think that also, in a sense, indicates the shift that is happening, and that digital is really moving to the high table. These are very interesting times for us. A lot of people taking time to reflect back on how things should have been, what should we have done in the past, and things like that. We've been doing that ourselves as well, doing a bit of reflection. Looking at what we had thought about years ago, how does it stack up for the industry today? And there were two things that came out really, and two things that we used to present to customers, prospects at industry forums, as saying this came out of a bit of a goal-setting exercise that we had run, saying that what is the kind of industry that, or what is the kind of enterprise that we are looking to enable from a digital enabler standpoint. And we had come up with two things, really. And this was what we had at that point, at a very, very high level, defined what should a digital air cargo enterprise look like. And we looked at it from an aspect of looking at what kind of engagement, what kind of interactions will happen through these platforms. And you look at different aspects here, and then what we tried to do was to say, if we went back in time, we did a bit of a time travel back a couple of years, and said, if any of these aspects did exist in our air freight enterprise today, and we were then hit by this monstrous crisis that we are in today, would the world have been very different? So that's the kind of thing that we looked at, and as I go through this, just imagine yourself looking at it from three aspects: the fact that you can't engage your customers the way you used to do before. Contactless is a big thing, which means that how you deploy a workforce is very different. You can't walk up to customs or other jurisdictional approvals with triplicates of paper and say, this is how you need to do. You're struggling with managing fixed costs. So if you look at all of these and say, if the world were if our enterprise was a true digital air enterprise, how different would the world have been today? And how we had defined it at that point in time was say, you had to have digitally connected and engaged customers. When I say digitally connected, it means that you're joined with them in terms of selling, in terms of servicing, in terms of communication. Digitally created air freight products. Now, I think, as Jessica was saying, the world is turned on its head, and what we are actually offering today is very different from what we thought and what we had built over a period of time. Would you have the ability to digitally create or conceptualize products and make sure you have a service delivery mechanism for that? Again, we talked about, Jessica again talked about capacity and freighters and partnerships and things like that. Would you have an ability to digitally extend your capacity to own, group, or partner for capacity, or even operate in today's environment, be very flexible on costs by having warehouses and handling and third-party things which you can actually outsource and really pay on the go. So all of this, imagine having had all of these coming into this crisis. wouldn't the world for us have been very different? And that's what led us to the fact that our thinking on what a digital enterprise should look like and what its key cornerstones are going to be is still very relevant, or even so more relevant today. And today's crisis actually is telling us that this is the direction that we have to take going forward. And we've done a similar exercise at a level deeper as well. We looked at saying, how would your operations be different, and how could we technologically enable a different world of operations? And we had looked at the entire gamut of stuff that happens and said, where can technology be brought in to make a difference or a transformative difference? And if you look across that chain, I'm not really going to go through all of it, but if you look across that chain, whether it is virtual call centers, chatbots, or AI-based agents who can actually get you to the right price, get the right quote in place, self-help kiosks that will enable self-service in today's world, or when it comes to actual acceptance of cargo, where you have automatic dimensioning, virtual reality for working on stuff that comes in, or proximity sensors which help you build manifest on their own, or during transportation, you look at very accurate and means by which you can roll up information which either comes in from technology, from devices or GPS and things like that, and give you very accurate information, or actually work with in today's world, use AI to drive disruption management, robotics aided breakdown, and all of these things. And if you lay that in today's world and say, if this did exist today, our world would have been so much more different. And this is something that we had put together a couple of years ago, and for us today as well is a realization that this is truly the direction that we should go, and that is where technology and digitalization can make a difference to the world that we are in. The point then is that why do we have to do all of these things? And Jessica actually mentioned this a couple of times, because we don't exist for ourselves. We are an enabling part of what is a global supply chain. And that supply chain, and if you look at all the chat that's happening in the world today around supply chain, and this is a hot conversation anywhere you go, everybody is talking about an integrated supply chain, and they're talking about it going digital. And we are a key enabling part of transportation in that supply chain. And that therefore means that our position in actually enabling this digital supply chain is very key. And stakeholders like shippers and consignees are really getting worked about getting this in place, because shippers today want to know where shipments are, be able to plan across these stakeholders so that they can get stuff from point A to point B in time and in the manner that they want it to be. And a lot of big shippers are actually taking a lot of things into their own hands. Meaning, I've said this in a number of conferences as well. If you look at premium liquor manufacturers, what they're doing is they're putting in very small chips into the wrappings of these liquor bottles, which will allow them to have complete transparency of where these shipments are and how they're getting transported. And in a sense, they're trying to take things into their own hands. The technology that's enabling these things. In the textile industry, they're using something called smart dust, and it's a very smart piece of technology with a small, meaning a computer the size of a grain of sand, which can pretty much do one or two operations, is actually enabling end-to-end visibility of these high-value textiles that go through this. And people are beginning to take matters into their own hands, and therefore, and that is why our efforts to actually make this digital supply chain seamless, and our efforts toward that is becoming very critical. And if you can look at it, if you can flip this around and also look at it, and if you flip this around and look at it, what it is that imagine the world today, for instance, planning. You look at planning, you just look at history and say, last year, this kind of volumes were there, and therefore we need to plan this kind of capacity. This is what we want to do. These are the shippers that will come to. Imagine a world in which somebody places a huge order for the next iPhone batch, and you know today that 3 months from now, there's going to be a huge demand that will come on a certain sector, and you can therefore plan accordingly, or instead, or have real-time changes to your capacity being done, or if something goes wrong, you're able to very quickly reach out to another partner to fulfill the demand. Imagine in a world, because this is not just us supplying, making sure that the digital supply chain works right, it is also making sure that our own world is much better managed. And this is where we have to look at the effectiveness of everything that we're doing on the digital front and see how good are we. And that is where I think if you were to measure the index of digitalization onto our segment of the industry, I think while there's a lot of good work that's happening across the chain, I think the key thing that you will see is that this is only as strong as the weakest link. When I say that because if you looked at the first two slides that I was presenting as well, was that there was a lot of focus on islands of digitalization in the scope of work that we are in terms of getting work done there. But if you look at this, the entire concept of the supply chain is handover between multiple stakeholders, and therefore our ability to integrate into that is key to making digitalization work for the supply chain. And that is where I think there's a lot of focus to be put on. People have always asked me around what is the strength, what level of digitalization do you see today in the air freight industry? A couple of years ago, I used to say we have survival digitalization, meaning you look at digitalization purely from a perspective of saying, am I doing enough so that my enterprise doesn't fall apart? Have EDI in place, a few other things in place. That used to be called survival digitalization. We've moved on since then into what I would call operational digitalization. You'll be putting areas of work and putting digitalization into islands of work that is being done. But what is critical is for us, and some very often a bit underplayed, underutilized in a sense, is the next level that I would call collaborative digitalization. And that is, while a lot of work needs to happen across the chain, this aspect would become a make or break in making digitalization work for the end purpose. And that needs to move up our own across players in terms of what focus needs to be there. And when I talk of collaborative digitalization, this is about making sure the digital footprint works seamlessly across the chain. And when it comes to that, I look at it from a sense that there are two aspects that drive what collaborative digitalization is all about. One is around mutually understood vocabulary. And I don't say common language deliberately, because I don't think because that's a very, very far-fetched goal into saying that you have one commonly understood language across all of these players. As long as you can have mutually understood vocabulary, the key aspects of information that have to be transmitted is understood, and we are able to action on it. I think that's where that'll be one key aspect of getting, and this is where the story of standards come in. And the other aspect is almost like, yes, you have mutually understood vocabulary, you have language you can understand between each other, but if the wires to your telephone are cut, then you can as well just communicate using flashcards. Meaning that is the other aspect in terms of taking this information across to relevant parties through a proper real-time information exchange landscape. So there needs to be a vocabulary and an exchange landscape in place, which will allow for us to get to a proper collaborative digitalization environment. And that is, these are the two things that we have to keep measuring to see where we are with regard to this. And the conversation on the first aspect is around standards. I've sat now in a number of panel discussions over the last few years, primarily around this subject of digitalization, and then most people have this aspect which comes up when people ask, where you with one record, where you with getting digitalization, which will allow seamless communication. And people often on panels typically say that to look to IATA often and say, guys, get your standards in place, we'll start working. And I've respectfully disagreed with a lot of this, because I fundamentally think that's a flawed argument of saying get the standards right now, then we will go and take and adopt it. And the standards business is actually not new, not just something that we as an industry are grappling with. Anybody in the technology industry, irrespective of which vertical, deals with it. And I'd like to take you to two things which will drive, where I'm trying to drive the point around how we have to deal with standards. And very often in debates I have around standards, people point me towards this historical battle that happened in the early 2000s on compact disc formats. This big battle between DVD and Blu-ray discs that were there. And people say that you had to get this right for adoption to happen. But what I look at it is that that's a very different context that we were looking at that point in time. Because when on a standards format wall like that, you were looking to get to a prescriptive format, because there are going to be millions of producers, say somebody producing a disc reader in a small town in Vietnam, to Sony doing it in their big factories in the US or in Japan. So all of these, and then people who are producing content to be put on the devices which would write these devices, and all of this required that there had to be one and only one format to this which would drive this thing. And so this is a very different ecosystem. I always also think that this battle was more a commercial battle, a battle of supremacy between some very large corporations. But that is not the context we are in. And where I always go back to in terms of pointing to that is the banking industry. Now, the fintech industry, or the financial service industry, is something that I always look up to with a lot of awe on what they have achieved with regard to digitalization. And the reason I say that is, I think most of us would remember, or I certainly do, remember walking up to banks to sign up, to give checks, to get cash, doing forms in triplicate, waiting weeks for money to transfer from one bank to another, and all of that. But that's no longer the case. I don't know, I can't remember the last time I visited a physical branch or filled up a form. And we do tons more of financial transactions. And while there are a lot of technologies that have been enabling that, one big thing that I think most of us would be recognized would be SWIFT, SWIFT codes that we see in as part of transfers and things like that. And this is, you can relate more to the problem we are grappling with today, because SWIFT was again a corporation formed by a set of banks which came in together, had a set of format, had a set of exchange standards put in place, evolved it over a period of time, drove adoption onto that, and gradually got to a point where it became a seamless de facto method of engagement. And that is what we have to attempt to do. In terms of making sure we have this common vocabulary to drive digitalization, as I would say. And from an IBS standpoint also, we've also had our view on how to deal with it. And we talk about a 3A approach on this. Rather than waiting for all of the standards, we talk of adopt, adapt, and advance. Adopt meaning you don't wait for this to get perfect. You take and bring it into your ecosystem and try and use these formats and standards which come out, irrespective of how complete they are, because that becomes the starting point, and that has to drive initial momentum. Because that is you need an initial momentum to be driven, and that is what we would recommend people go ahead and do is adopt these standards. The second thing is around adapt, and this is something that I relate to a lot. I wasn't around when IMP standards were put in place, but I've seen the journey around Cargo XML, for example. And Cargo XML was supposed to be this big change agent, because fundamentally the structures became far more looser and therefore allowed for greater creativity in terms of information exchange. So the Cargo XML was supposed to give that big boost in terms of information exchange that comes in. And what we've worked with a lot of carriers and other players in terms of implementing cargo XML. And what we've seen multiple behaviors around this. And some places we've seen players like forwarders, somebody completely making it, using this leeway that is there to fill up with a lot of stuff which nobody understands. The worst part has been that we've seen people who've tried to implement IMP with XML, essentially old wine in new bottle, because what you would get from a cargo XML at some point became exactly what you would get from an IMP, except the fact that the standards are a bit more difficult to decode. And that is, and what would follow would be a PR saying that we've now implemented cargo XML. And therefore, the value delivery was in there. What did cargo XML then do for you? And that is where we've got to learn to adapt these standards to say, how can we make this work to make a business difference? And that is where we've worked in terms of adapting to show value delivered. And then once you've done this, this is I mean, as Jessica was saying, this is a cycle of trying, learning, and advancing. And that advancing means we try and provide, help get that feedback in to help get it to a standards that will work. And that will go again through an adoption, adapt, and advance cycle. So this is how we've looked at standards, and this is how we would recommend people look at it and not look for things to fall in place completely in the first instance, and then get it running from there. This, having gotten the common vocabulary out of the way, the other thing is around this interoperability. I talked about these telephone lines which should be connected to each other for us to exchange this common vocabulary and therefore make use of it. And that as well comes up with two stark choices in a sense. One is what I would call like a Facebook approach, which is you have a massive homogeneous platform, which is the one-stop shop to all of the information that is there, and everybody logs onto it, gets the information, works through it. Sounds a very simple approach to have. And like today, like Facebook today, Facebook is pretty much de facto the only social network. If you have to be on a network, you have to be on Facebook. And that's one approach. We've seen a lot of initiatives of late as well, looking at saying, can you put together platforms which will become the backbone of all of this information that is in place? And very often, I think, while the idea is simpler to implement, my view has been that you will run into a lot of resistance on this because of the number of commercial stakeholders engaged in this, and most people wouldn't want to be seen to be losing control of this, and it'll be things like that will eventually become the blocker for a platform like that. And therefore, because it'll end up, worst case, it'll end up becoming a lowest common denominator, whatever you can get through with minimal resistance. The other thing that we've always probably seen as probably the better approach would be to have a distributed digital ecosystem with multiple touch points. You would have multiple Facebook kind of things or backbones that you would put in there. They will talk to each other. You will have people doing single one-to-one communication, as long as, I think the underlying being the outcome of seamless any party to any party information exchange, instruction exchange can happen. And that probably is where along with standards we can evolve, like the World Wide Web or like the internet, into a very heterogeneous ecosystem which can interoperate and therefore drive this point of collaborative digitalization. And as I said, our drive around this has also been very similar. And our drive has been to say, and this has been a mantra for a while now, to enable or create one big digital ecosystem. And that is the big drive that we are driving towards, and the key being towards getting to a very collaborative digital ecosystem. And this has been based on 4 pillars for us. And the first has been partnerships. for the last 6-8 months and almost a year, we probably have talked to more partners than we have to prospects and customers. We've had wonderful engagements with a number of them. We've had recent press releases around this. We've been engaged with strong digital sales platforms like Cargo One and Web Cargo. We've been talking and engaged with partners like Pay Cargo on the financial side. We're talking to large forwarder systems, large forwarders, talking to hardware providers in terms of having OEM software distributed, talking to compliance systems which will help with compliance in the operation. Basically, I think the fundamental thing is, as Jessica was mentioning, is about people engagement. We build strong, trustworthy partnerships with players so that we can together give a higher value back to our customers. We're looking at these partnerships to say, can we add 1 + 1 and give 3 back to the customer? I think that has been one big pillar of our engagement, and we engage now with a whole ecosystem of providers who can get us there. And what we're trying to do as part of that is build exchange platforms. A big investment that is coming in from our side is also around building exchange platforms. When I say exchange platforms, is things that today the need. For instance, somebody wants to get onto a new digital sales platform. There's a bit of an entry barrier in the sense that somebody has to look at this, get a technology plan working, get these connected, get all of these working, and therefore that itself becomes a dampener around getting these things to work. And what we've been trying to do is to smoothen that out by saying build exchange platforms, where, for instance, we now have a platform called a sales platform, which has on one side connected to a number of players, which are these digital sales players like Cargo One and Web Cargo. We're talking to a lot of other platforms, talk to forwarder systems, all of these things together. And on the other side, we have airlines hooking up onto that. And therefore, all it requires, therefore, is for airlines to just hook up onto this and be able to reach out seamlessly, get to connect to another platform, or even better, be able to flip platforms with the flip of a switch. I think that is where what then it enables is it enables the decision making and the entry barrier for connected ecosystems to be much better. And this is where a lot of our investments has been also to go to provide that connected set of telephones that will work. And we don't intend this to be the backbone, but be one of these mechanisms for engagement. The other aspect we've been working on is what we call cross-org integration. And when I talk of cross-org integration, for example, if you pick up something like an airline, because a big part of the service delivery for an airline for moving something from point A to point B is serviced by a ground handler, and where the airline takes responsibility for that service, and very often that connectivity is either a telephone line or a very I'd say lean exchange mechanism like an FBA. Now, what we've been trying to do is to make that conversation rich through a platform called Cargo Virtual Connect, where we're saying that, for instance, if you have very strong views around as an airline on how pallets have to be built up with information across things like that, we would enable very rich exchange between these two players, so that the service delivery becomes seamless. Or, for instance, somebody wants to quickly you have a quick change in mind as to how you want to build something. Today, the easiest thing is for somebody to make a phone call, or even worse, is many airlines do have their own employees sitting and monitoring what ground handlers are doing. What we're looking to have is, again, platforms where airlines and ground handlers can connect onto this and therefore have a far richer exchange of information. Today, we're looking at this with iCargo customers across. We are working towards making this completely neutral as well. Similarly, on joint venture engines, where we say today, as Jessica again was saying about need for for looking at capacity very differently, whether it's through partners and have the ability to seamlessly do that. And that is where we're looking at platforms like cross as joint venture engines. All of this is about getting seamless transactions to happen. And that's where this is again part of collaboration, as we would say. And the last bit being that we are making the application that we do open APIs, where we have default APIs that will allow for people to either build on top of it or for systems that to hook onto it to make information open and available for people to engage with. Now, this is how we're looking at all of this is towards saying where the world going tomorrow needs to be a connected ecosystem. We use the great work done on initiatives like One Record and give a platform for One Record to flourish with all of us contributing. So this is one of our drives towards this, and this is one of our biggest initiatives this year in terms of driving this forward. And what do we see while having gone through a lot of this in terms of what we're looking at what next in terms of, and these are some of these things that I've observed and thought we should look at going forward is that we've got to expand pilot programs to become open with participation, meaning not just have say by 20th of July you put in your registrations and we have this limited pilot that happens. I think pilots need to be because I think as I was saying earlier, it's about adapting and improving these things, where the terms of reference have to be the outcome and not the process. So therefore you let people try out a lot of things on say One Record, and then as multilateral organization, you come and look at it and say what's been achieved through a platform like this, and how can it be improved more. And I would also urge vendors like ourselves to come together along with customers and airlines and ground handlers to try a lot of these joint initiatives. And I think that is what is going to drive a lot of momentum on this. And it will be, you will have to, once you get to a degree of critical momentum, I think a lot of things will start to fall in place. So that's what I had around what I wanted to speak. Just give me 10 seconds for people who don't know who IVS are. We are a digital platforms provider, purely focused on the travel, transportation, and logistics space. We run 5 platforms on passenger booking, loyalties, flight operations, cargo, on which we would like to believe we are leaders as well, tour and cruise, and hospitality, with a horizontal on consulting and digital transformation. And what this has helped us for me, particularly from a cargo space, is we've been able to live off and leverage a number of things that happen, innovations that happen in other verticals as well. We've picked up things, for example, from loyalty to do cargo loyalty and things like that. So this has been our drive, and these are difficult times for us as well, given the industry that we service is in difficult times, but it's also very exciting as we see digital moving up the decision-making chain for us. With that, I'll hand it over back to you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Ashok, thank you so much. I always find a way to hear you speak wherever you are. That was really, really great. We're going to continue with, I'd like to introduce Hank Mulder, Head of Cargo Digital at IATA, and we'll hold the Q&A until after this next one. Hank, over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you very much. Let's get into it then. Let me see if this is moving forward. Okay, it's not. Okay, what's going on here? Presentation, is that possible? Yes, okay. Let me share a different one. Apologies for that. On here. Should be there. Okay, you got it? Very good. All right, so I was very interested to hear both Jessica's perspective and Ashok's perspective. And as you can tell, these, okay, who's sharing right now? I was sharing before. Somebody has.
Ashok.
Okay. Okay. Let's go back. Okay.
Sorry about
Sorry.
that.
No problem. Find out where I was. I think I was here. Yes. Okay, back to that. So you've heard from a leading and very successful airline, and also from a leading and very successful solutions provider. Of course, from our side, from IATA, we look at it as an industry, and we have our challenges. And one of the things, of course, we all know is that we're dealing with a very, very fragmented landscape when it comes to air transport and everything that goes with it. And just to give you a bit of a sense of that, and most of this you know, but if you look at the processes, the connectivity, the legislation, the business standards, everything you can imagine, compliance, technology, if you look at this at a global scale, then it's a bit like this map here. It's a patchwork of all of these different things that somehow have to fit together. And if you look at connectivity, Ashok already mentioned some of these generations like Cargo Imp and XML, and now One Record, and then we have solution providers, we have local standards, we have bespoke integrations. And again, it's a very colorful landscape where all of this somehow exists together. The business itself is also fragmented. We have operations who have given that a lot of focus when it comes to digitalization, but that's just the cargo operations. We also have the airline operations or the commercial operations, financial operations. You can go on, there's all these different elements that airlines and their partners have to deal with. And then we have the trade itself, it's a very colorful story which is changing all the time, and not just if you just look at the last 6 months, what's happened to global trade and how the impact of COVID has changed a lot of these lines and colors, and how a lot of the parties involved in this international trade had to change the way they were doing business, how supply chains were shortening all of a sudden, how certain markets were closing, and somehow all of this has to work. The problem that we see is that this is actually changing very fast. And so the problems that come from fragmentation also grow very fast, and this is a problem. Now, the question is, what's new about that? And the answer is nothing new about this. We've known this for a long time. Jessica referred to it. A lot of what Ashok was saying was ways of dealing with this. As a solutions provider, IBS has as one of their main challenges, how do you patch together this colorful world with all of these different things that are changing all of the time? So the question is, what is new about it? And what's new about it is this. Right now, we're living in a very, very strange time. It has to be the strangest year, certainly in my career, when it comes to business, when it comes to technology, when it comes to the air transport industry, is what COVID-19 has done. It really has thrown everything upside down. And if we look at, for example, very specifically, what has happened. So pre-COVID, and the numbers, it's interesting to hear that Jessica mentioned the same numbers, 40 years old technology that we have been fine-tuning, right? Now this is really bad because in fact, technologies change every 10 years roughly. So we've missed 4 opportunities to replace old technology with new technology, instead of which we've been fine-tuning the old stuff, okay? Just the story from IMP to XML, Ashok also referred to that. We've been trying for 10 years to switch from one to the other. And I have to say, not all that successfully for the reasons that Ashok mentioned. And now we're doing data sharing at One Record, and we're trying to make that work. But the reality is, we're basing all of this on old processes, old technology, and old mindsets, okay? That's pre-COVID. That's where we are today. Now, what happens next is that if we look at where we are in 2020 in this crazy COVID world, is that we still have exactly the same old processes, old technology, and old mindsets, but we're having some additional problems. We have a significant volume reduction. And because of the absence of passenger air travel, we also have constrained capacity. Now, in a strange way, one of the strangest turns of event in this crisis that turned out to be quite good news for air cargo, because less capacity, even though there was less volume as well, actually turned out to be a fairly profitable story for the air cargo industry. Having said that, this won't last, okay? we're now suffering from significant cash constraints. Is how we're going to pay for it all. We have seen significant resource shrinkage taking place, whether it's human resources. We have seen a lot of furloughs. We have seen a lot of restructurings, people leaving companies, but we're also seeing project resources disappearing and shrinking. And so even though I think those of you that are on this call, a lot of you are involved in digitalization, and although, excuse me, digitalization is a very, very relevant topic, even there we're seeing significant shrinkage. And you see companies coming up with all sorts of necessary rules about, well, if there's no payback in the next 3 years, then we're not going to do this project. Or if there's no payback in the next year, then we're not going to do this project. So it leaves us with a fairly difficult environment to operate in. But I think that the story actually gets more interesting if we look at what's going to happen before and after. Okay, so I'll call these the pie stories. So we have pre-COVID, we have in COVID, and we have post-COVID. Now, if we consider that, if you look at these pies as perhaps whether it's the global market or the volumes or the business you're in or the overall transport business or trade, whatever you want to call it, there is a pie that's being shared by all of us, right? Whether it's IATA, whether it's IBS, whether it's American Airlines, whether it's anyone else that's operating in the air cargo business. At the moment, we're in a very constrained environment. So the market's got smaller, right? The overall pie is smaller, but our market shares perhaps haven't changed. But of course, the reality is that with a smaller market, we're not having the same revenues and we can't do the same things. At some point, we'll come back to where we were before in the post-COVID area. IATA's predictions are we're looking at sort of 2022. We'll see this seems to change by the day. But at some point, I think we can all agree that we'll get back to where we were. So what's happening right now? I think right now we're all aware that there are many players in the market that are in significant trouble. Okay, there are players in the market that have exited or that are going to exit. So our current market is very, very challenging and very difficult. And one of the things that IBS, that Ashok was referring to, in fact, it was the first line in one of their responses. It has to do with partnerships, okay? New industry partnerships. And you look at, for example, of the IBS that is now working together with Web Cargo, or he mentioned Pay Cargo. We've also seen, for example, Pay Cargo with Nextshore. These are companies that are not doing the same thing, but they are cooperating together. And by doing so, they can actually grow each one of them grow their business and their market share, either by complementing functionality or by complementing their actual markets and their customers, right? So this is one way of growing your business in a very, very difficult environment, hopefully to a point where you get back to the original size of the pie, so that you survive. At least that's the idea. So where does that leave us? There will be parts of this business, whichever part you're in, when you're actually in the transport part or in the supplier part, there will be parts that do not change. So at some point when we get out of the crisis time, we'll get back to where we were before, similar market share, similar performance, similar everything. We'll see that some players will do well. We will always see that, you know. Crisis brings out the best in some companies and the worst in others. But those that are really good, they may well be taking maybe the same market share, but they'll be in a bigger market because, of course, the market will grow as well. We'll have seen some exits, and as a consequence, we'll also see some new entrants. Okay, so the new entrants, they may be in new market segments that didn't exist before COVID, but all of a sudden do now. I mean, the whole digitalization story is something that is becoming more relevant by the day. And then we have that earlier part, the industry partnerships. And so if you look at this pie story here, what you can see is that, yes, at the moment, we're in a super difficult environment. We'll see trouble, we'll see exit, and we'll see some people surviving because of new partnerships. But ultimately, post-COVID, it will grow again. It won't be the same pie, it won't be the same players, and it won't be the same offerings, but the pie will continue to grow. And I think the point I would like to stress is that at this point, in my view, the biggest bet I would put is on the new partnerships. Expanding your market in this environment is tough, but there are some really good people out there that can do that. Being a new entrant, that's a gamble. And maybe you're in that business, and if you're a startup, who knows? You may survive. We've seen it in the past. You may do well. I think for the existing players, the biggest bet I think is on cooperation and working together. Okay, and so I think that where we are now is if we can somehow explore these things together. And when I use the word explore, what I mean is that different companies, different parts of the business, and whether it's IATA with an airline, whether it's IBS with one of their competitors even, just to talk, okay? It doesn't cost anything to find out what is going on. Where do we have overlapping offers? Where can we have different functionalities and parts of a business that are not mutually exclusive, but that can actually complement each other? We may be able to survive together and grow together. And I think it means, combining where we're good, integrating technologies, and exploring markets, either existing markets that are complementary or even new markets. And this is a different way of speaking about very much what Ashok was saying. We have a very clear sort of corporate strategy to do this. But I think this works for the entire industry, not just for IBS and not just for other parties. It also works for us, IATA, as an industry organization. What we have realized is that, of course, the people we work with, the airlines, the IT solution providers, the forwarders, all the other parties, they're in a very difficult environment themselves. The budgets are cut, the people are constrained or sometimes disappearing. And so we need to explore together. Now, earlier on, Jonathan mentioned that we had a hackathon this weekend, and it's an extraordinary experience. Last weekend, it was online and remote, so we're actually sitting in exactly the same room as where we're now, except that we had 18 teams around the world, really in every corner of the world, that was coming up with new solutions for digitalization in air cargo in particular. And so if you look at the resources they were bringing to the table without actually spending any money, that was the interesting part, is the ability to explore ideas just by, in their case, investing a weekend. But you can do this even during the work week. Is okay. Let's think. Okay, let's think a little bit differently. Let's speak with each other. So exploring together, it may just allow us to survive this together and to grow together. And so, what are we talking about when we're talking about this sort of exploration? I'm showing you a slide here. Sort of, I refer to as end-to-end digitalization, and the reason I use the term end-to-end is that if you were to ask us the question 5 years ago, we were very focused on a very small part of the problem of digitalization. The story of IMP, Cargo IMP, really was looking at a very narrow part of where airlines work together with their partners and their customers. Very much focused on airway bills, very much focused on the freight that's being moved. But many areas, although in theory they were addressed, in practice they were not. Dangerous goods is a good example. In theory, it was addressed. In practice, we still use paper documents today. ULD management, there were separate solutions. E-commerce, of course, is a whole new one. Claims is a very traditional process, which is completely independent from everything else. And if you look at this slide here, you see all of these different concepts and terms that all make up air cargo and air transport. The reality is that if we don't digitalize all of this, we're going to stay stuck in this old world, which may actually put so much constraint on us that we become, very sadly, one of the orange or red parts of the pie. In other words, we might disappear. So my call to the industry, my call to the partners, my call to the airlines, my call also to their customers, the forwarders, the shippers, and our other partners, the customs, the e-commerce, is we really need to explore this together, and we can take any of these. Okay, as was mentioned by Ashok, we've done a lot of work on One Record in the last few years. There's a lot of progress. The standard is evolving nicely, but for the time being, it's still very much work in progress. But we can take any of these elements, and whether it's quotes and booking, whether it's payments, whether it's pharma or customs or cold chain or anything, each of these topics, we can work together with companies that need that and say, okay, how would we do this with One Record, right? How would we do claims with One Record? How do we make payments? How do we manage e-commerce? How do we manage dangerous goods? But it doesn't stop there, because this is not just about IATA and its standards. It is also about IT solution providers like IBS, okay? Is how would IBS do this? How do they do payments? Well, they mentioned they're talking to Pay Cargo, and I'm sure they have their own payment solutions as well. How would they do pharma, cold chain, customs? I know they have answers already, but perhaps there's opportunities with parts where they're not present. You remember I showed you a slide with this colorful map. There's no solution provider today that really that provides solutions for all of the different colors, for all of these different problems there. And I think that the opportunity today is not necessarily to say, I'm here, I'm the biggest, I'm the best, I'm going to go ahead and manage this whole thing on my own. It's not going to work. I think the opportunity and the absolute necessity now is, okay, who can I work with without necessarily spending a lot of money or investing a lot of money to have a complementary solution that I already have with their complementary solution to address one of the issues that we see here in order to end-to-end digitalization. And so again, my call to all of you is, let's have this conversation. Certainly from our side, we'll reach out to you, but reach out to us. Reach out to American Airlines, reach out to IBS, reach out to anyone that you work with and say, okay, there's a problem here where we have a very traditional approach. We think we can do this differently. We must do it differently. Let's start together. It may be small today, but we can grow that afterwards. And don't worry about growing. It will grow anyway because the pie will get bigger at some point. Okay, so this is where I want to leave it. My call to action is, let's work together. Let's solve these problems together with what we have. And at some point, hopefully, the pie will get back to where it should be, and we'll all be happy again, and hopefully a completely renewed industry, and we can look back at this as an interesting learning process. So with that, Jonathan, I'm handing back to you.
Thanks, Hank. That was absolutely terrific. In fact, between the last two questions that came up from the audience, I think they were beautifully answered in combination of both Ashok and Hank, your presentation. One was around adapting to COVID, and the other really touched on partnerships, how to reach out, and adapting to that as well. So I think with that, we are coming up at time. I'd like to thank the audience for participating today. Wherever you are in the world, whatever you do in the industry, this was a great kickoff to the many great sessions that are coming up in the rest of the digital conference. And I hope to see you there. I'd like to thank our sponsors again. We have IBS Software, Pay Cargo, and Rieger Software. I'd like to thank the speakers, Jessica, Ashok, and Hank, for great presentations. And I think, to sum everything up, we talked about adapting, we talked about embracing change, embracing technology, and somehow, despite this pandemic, feeling more connected than ever before. So thanks to IATA for finding a way to keep this going, keeping the momentum going, keeping us all connected, and looking forward to seeing all of you throughout the rest of the digital conference. Thanks very much.
Thank you.